Hello, my name is Mark Carlo. This is Voices of the Coastal Bend. Today my guest is Mr. Robert Stoner. He's a teacher at West Oso High School, right?
West Oso Junior High, yes, sir.
What is Oso? What is Oso?
Oso means bear.
Oso means bear in Spanish. So
bear.
what is the etymology or the origins of why would they call this West Bear High School?
Well,
Were there bears out there?
Funny. Oso is a creek that runs out south of town, and the old high school, the old West Oso, was out in the Petronilla area. That's where it was established. It was a school that was established mostly for the workers off the Chapman Ranch, way back in the early 1900s, late 1800s.
So that's the name of the creek. It's named for a bear, but we don't know why the creek is named for a bear either.
No, we don't know why the creek is named for it.
Okay.
And we're the Bears, so we're the West Bear Bears.
And right before the show, one of our so we'll call him an associate producer, Mr. Trejo, brought up an interesting thing that I was unaware of. That right now that there's a proposition that we give the same students, the same test to students to graduate as is given to immigrants.
I think that's a pretty far-fetched idea. I don't know why that would be necessary.
But well, is it an idea? And who's proposing the idea? And what have you read about it?
I've just heard a little bit about it. I haven't heard a lot about it, but it's one of those things that comes up when people who are trying to stir the pot in education, one of the ideas they have.
Well, let's talk about stirring the pot in education. How long have you been in education?
25 years, my 25th.
And I would assume to be a teacher in the state of Texas, you have to be certified as a teacher?
Yes, sir.
Do you have in-school suspension?
In-school suspension.
I did in-school suspension my first year out of college in Ohio, and that was a landmark kind of program. I think we originated it. So,
Right.
do you have to be certified to be a teacher to do the in-school suspension class? You don't?
No.
Do you have to be a college graduate?
No, 60 hours minimum.
60 hours minimum? And at any rate, we were talking about standardized testing, and the standardized test, a new standardized test. Right now, we have standardized testing in the state of Texas. You could go through high school, and if you don't pass a standardized test, you don't get your high school diploma. Is that how that works?
It's changed a little bit. Under the last incarnation of the system, they were called exit test. And as a junior, you would have to pass tests in the core areas. You had roughly 8 attempts to pass those tests before you graduated. Now, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, because at the way that was done, and those tests only being given the junior year, a student could theoretically pass all of their coursework all through from kindergarten on, and then not pass the math exit test by 1 point, and they would not be allowed to graduate.
I think I met one person who stated something to that effect, that they couldn't pass that. So what is the name of this test that one has to pass to get their maybe I didn't follow you. To get your high school diploma, what is the name of the test you have to pass?
Well, that was under the old system. They were called tax exit exams.
Yes.
And those have been replaced now with the STAR. Mm-hmm. And under the STAR, we do what's called end of course exams. So the legislature thought this was a better idea. Rather than have them take their test their junior year, they take them as they're taking they take end of course tests as they're taking the courses. So you come in your freshman year, you take Algebra 1, you can pass the course, but to get credit for the course, you have to pass the end of course exam at the end of the year.
So apparently there's an acknowledgement that the tax, whatever that stood for, wasn't working. Is that an acknowledgement? Apparently it wasn't working, or they wouldn't have changed it, right?
I don't think they see it that way. A lot of educators do. Standardized testing has been around in Texas for a long time. So back in like 89, 90, we had a test that was called the TEAMS test. And then it changed. It was called the TOS test. Then it changed. It was called the TAX test. Now it's changed and called the STAR. And the idea behind standardized testing was that once these standards were put in place for every school in Texas, once these schools mastered those standards, the next evolution of testing would be at a much higher level. And the terms they use are relevance and rigor. as they move up in testing, they add relevance and they add rigor. Those are the two key words kind of in testing.
Sitting here, I'm very skeptical about relevance and rigor and the applications in a schoolroom and the effectiveness of teaching. Do you think that when I went to high school, etc., we did not have standardized testing, and it seemed like, allegedly, according to whatever statistics I've read, education was better prior to standardized testing?
I think you could definitely say that it was more well-rounded, because now what you have is, if you think about it in a practical sense, if you look at social studies, okay, social studies is social studies. If you look at American government is American government. How do you decide which of those things are the most important for a student to learn? What's going to be important for that child or that individual as they move out of education and move out into the real world? What is it that they need to know? What is it that they need to have? And who determines that? And the thing about
I thought that was an, excuse me, I didn't think that was I thought right before the show you were implying that is not a determination what somebody needs in the real world to succeed as part of our educational system.
Well, I think the point I was trying to make was we're sort of, well, if you go back to 1985 and H. Ross Perot, when H. Ross Perot dumped literally billions of dollars into the Texas education system, his only stipulation was that education be done the way he wanted it done. And through House Bill 72 and Senate Bill 1, passed in 1985, H. Ross Perot's idea was that, and this was stated, that every student in the public education system in Texas receive exactly the same education until they're 18 years of age. After that, if they wanted to do vocational programs or whatever, they were free to go do that. But he removed, by changing the way things had been done in Texas. Texas had always had very strong vocational programs. There were high schools here that were doing amazing things with agriculture and welding and auto body repair and construction trades and things of that nature. After 1985, all of those things were stripped from Texas public schools. You don't see
as a result of the actions of H. Ross Perot.
Right, exactly.
Who basically, you're inferring, bought out the education system for the whole state by contributing a tremendous amount of money.
Indeed. That's the way I see it. And I think
And now this is an anecdotal story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. Years ago, I was flying somewhere, and there was a school teacher on that flight. And she was, I think, retiring or about to retire. And she said that basically H. Ross Perot dumped all that money, and he owned the company that would do would grade the standardized testing.
I don't know about
and then, did you ever heard that? So he owned that company. And then after he set up that company to do the standardized testing, and then after he got all this passed, he sold this company at a tremendous amount of money.
Right, indeed.
Is that true?
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that the gist.
So his motives may be questionable.
Well, I think the motives of any standardized testing corporation are certainly going to be that way, because they've got their own agenda. They're out to raise money. Now, if you look at it in kind of a simplistic view, and it may be overly simplistic, but if you think about this, you have to pass this test. If you don't pass the test, you have an opportunity to take it again. Well, every time that test is administered, each test is $75 or $100 a piece, and just for one copy of the test. To get the test graded is another fee. So you've got these tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Texas school students who go and take their initial round of testing. those companies, you are correct. Those are for-profit corporations that provide the testing materials. They provide the testing materials and the grading of those materials.
There's an indication of authoritarianism or fascism in terms of standardized testing, isn't there? In other words, a central government or body is going to determine what is important for us to know.
Right. If you look at it and you go back into Texas politics and you talk about Governor Bush and the ideas that he had before he went into the presidency with what was called No Child Left Behind. It's a great idea in theory. You want these kids to be able to achieve certain things at certain points in their education. In other words, the first one was by third grade, every child would be able to read. Okay, well, how do you police that? How do you find out if what you're doing is working? You test those third graders. Now, there's going to be a percentage of them that don't pass. What do you do with them? Do you actually hold them back?
Well, right.
Do you hold the third
What are they
grader?
doing now?
Right. And
well, what are they doing now?
well, that's what they're doing.
They're holding them back.
Yeah. But
And then they get discouraged and they drop out.
right.
Because I've seen it in my Social Security disability
And
practice.
you kind of roll back around to that vocational thing, and you ask yourself, is every child that ever attends our schools meant to have the exact same education? Or is every student going to be totally interested in English 1, Algebra 1?
Years ago, when I went to high school in Ohio, the suburban high school that I went to, they had college prep, and then they had, regular classes, and maybe they had vocational training.
Right.
So now I'm not certain every school had it set up like that, but they had 3 levels. And then if you couldn't pass the whole college prep curriculum, you were considered to be irregular. Do you have that in the West OSO system?
Well, and look, and you're exactly, point well made. And if you go back in the history of standardized testing, when you and I were in students in school, they had 2 tests. It's pretty much nationwide. They had 2 tests: the Iowa Basic Skills Test and the California Achievement Test. Those were the 2 measures.
I forgot even those names.
Those are the 2 measures of.
So I would have taken those?
You would have taken those, yeah, and probably on a yearly basis. Now, you probably didn't have anyone sit down with you one-on-one and go over your results and speak to you about you need to buff up your English a little bit. Now, your parents may have got a copy of it, and when they came around, hey, look, they calculated your IQ. You've got 157 IQ. You can do anything.
No, not.
But so when I was in junior
so
high,
so they did IQ testing back then.
yes, and
Do they do IQ testing now?
We don't see IQ scores anymore. It's all just whether or not you pass the test. But to your point, when those tests were given, that data was used to decide where kids go. And what you were talking about in Ohio was basically tracking. So tracking would be, if a student made a high score of college prep, you put them in this track. If they didn't, you put them in this track. If they were lower, you put them in another track. The problem with that, if you look at it from a sociological aspect, is that if you take an immigrant child that hasn't had the same background, then and isn't able to score the higher tests like the children of college educated parents and things like that, you have this large immigrant group or migrant group coming in. They're not prepared to take they're not prepared to be in that college prep track. So basically you're sticking all of them in vocational. So you go all the way back to 67, 68 in California when they had the blowouts and the student protest. What they were protesting was they had no opportunity. They were told as they started in 9th grade, okay.
I thought they were protesting the Vietnam War. There was never any media publicity that they were protesting schools.
There wasn't a lot of publicity. There is now.
But that's interesting. So I interrupted you. What were they? What was that issue again?
But so you have in California, in Southern California, you had hundreds of thousands of students of Mexican American descent who were attending these white schools. And they were being told by their counselors, okay, mija, you're going to take care of white people's children. So you're going to take home ec and family planning classes. Oh, okay. Come here, sir. You're going to work on people's cars. Here's an automotive program for you. So,
and a minority can make a genuine criticism of that
yes,
system.
indeed. And most
But
certainly.
on the other hand, it is a practical application of what they probably would wind up doing. I can't remember who's the man who the black man that was active in education in the 1800s. Carver.
Oh yeah, you're right. George Washington Carver.
I think he stated for black Americans that they at that time that they should start at the bottom and not have expectations towards the top. That they needed to raise up gradually. Incrementally,
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
That was his social observation
and so
at that time.
And so there you are, you're kind of in a catch-22 situation. And the idea is, how do we best serve these students, and how do we best let them achieve what is in them to achieve, what they are going to become, what they're really going to be? How do we find that out? How do we allow that to bloom?
But it was freer before, right? And I'll give you an example. See, I was kind of everybody has strengths and weaknesses in their life, right? I was kind of like sly or something, right? So I'm goofing off the whole deal, and then I say, well, I better start getting my grades up because I want to go to college, right? So then maybe the senior year, then I applied myself, which I had a lot of catching up to do, and that was hard to do. But back then they had open admissions. So I got in a state college with open admissions, and I did well enough there. Then I went to a private school. So I kind of angled the system.
Right.
But if you have all this authoritarian stuff in, you can't do that. And
Well,
isn't that supposedly a failure of some of the educational systems in Japan or whatever, where they're not as flexible as our own system because they are set up in a more authoritarian structure? Is that right?
Probably so. And and going back to what you were saying there, when I was in junior high, we had 3 classes. We had the advanced class, we had the middle of the road class, and then you had the low class. And so those kids were tracked from the time they were probably, 2nd or 3rd grade. They were put into these groups. Mm-hmm. You were in 2A, 2B, 2C, whatever it was. And so it is rather authoritarian, because how would a member of one of those groups move
up
to the mobility of been trying to?
And then once he's labeled.
Once you're labeled. And so the whole thing goes, education and economics go hand in hand. If you're locked into this educationally, then you're locked into this economically. And after that goes through a generation, then you have generational problems with that.
Well, it was that way, but now I think the opportunities for typical college graduates that are so low that I'm not so certain that the opportunity is necessarily through education anymore as we typically knew it in the United States.
And that's another thing, point well made. School teachers by nature are probably going to be rather idealistic people. Agreed. We all have an idea when we, in our craft, that our mission statement is that every student can learn. Okay, every student can learn, right?
I don't know why I thought that was funny. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but it is, because you think about.
I don't know why that's so funny to me.
But you think about. You think about the random.
I guess they can. Of course, they can learn,
right.
But how much?
Exactly. Exactly.
And some can't, and that's no big deal.
Well,
if they can.
When you take something like what H. Ross Perot was trying to do and say, it's a great idea, it's a noble idea. We're going to educate everybody exactly the same. Everybody's going to take Algebra 1. Everybody's going to take English 1. Everybody's going to follow this program. And they're very authoritarian. You're correct about that. What about the student that isn't for? What about the student that is going to be a skilled welder?
Let me interrupt you. So the black Americans always said, and I think it was said with a certain degree of validity, these tests are culturally biased. And I think they are.
Yeah.
I never heard this, and I shouldn't go off on this tangent, but I remember taking maybe the LSAT and the GRE, the Graduate Record Exam. They still have that stuff?
Yeah, indeed, they do.
The Graduate Record Exam.
It's a much bigger deal now than it was when you.
And they'd have these long paragraphs.
Right.
And you're supposed to they were kind of strange fact patterns.
Very strange.
Right?
I can remember one question in particular.
No, you could remember this.
I
Man, must be a genius.
I can remember
Yes,
a
go ahead.
question about a dinner party. And there was a long paragraph, and it explained that so-and-so couldn't sit next to so-and-so, and so-and-so wasn't supposed to be next, and you had to arrange these people at the table. And that was one of your questions on your GRE.
So you have this strange fact pattern that somebody from, would you say, a street or an ethnic background, you say, what is this?
What if you'd never been to a dinner party?
Well, that's true. Yeah. That's true too. That's another indication. So I think there was some validity in these tests being culturally biased, right. but even to the extent of the way you thought.
Right. And maybe these days we wouldn't even have to say culturally biased, but definitely socioeconomically biased. Because if you come from a house where college education is the standard, and I think there's a lot to be said about that too, that as especially immigrant groups, no matter where they came from, all immigrant groups that came to the United States, you had to have one kid in the family be the first one to graduate high school. That set a standard for all the other members of the family and the extended family. So-and-so graduated high school, you will too. That person pulls the other ones across. Now, another generation goes by, and maybe you get one into college. That person gets a college degree. Oh. Now that becomes the norm, you know. That's how you get that.
Well, the other interesting thing I've never heard discussed is, let's face it, the most successful immigrants don't come here.
True.
I don't care what European country. If you're doing real rich and you're doing real well in wherever it is, Italy, Spain, Greece, you're not going to, right?
No.
I mean, this is for. So, I mean, obviously, in our educational system, it sounds like they've got real high expectations, wherein you're bringing over many peasant farmers from, right?
In Ireland, you know, they had to come over because of the potato famine. You know, so
right, right.
So
you know,
they were not the people that had the money.
No. Well,
but, you know.
So I guess it would be challenging regarding the immigrants in particular. Are they doing do they still do bilingual education, or is that?
The way that works now is it's almost full immersion.
Full immersion in English.
If a student comes here from another. If English is a second language, English ESL, English as a second language, they're paired up with an ESL teacher. And as far as now, how that relates to testing is this: they have 3 years to learn English and be able to take an English language test. It doesn't matter if they come in as a 6-year-old or a 14-year-old. They've got 3 years to learn English, and then they take the regular test that everybody else takes.
You know what I could say in my father's generation, what they used to do is, if you didn't speak English, they would just fail you in first grade.
True.
And it seemed like, I only know any of those old timers that they only failed once.
Right.
Before they caught up.
Well, true enough. You know.
Well,
so kids at a younger age are much pick up languages much easier.
Absolutely.
Well, they say that after we get to be about 12 or 13 years of age, it's much harder to pick up another language then.
So talking about the cultural bias in the testing, let's say that you have to pass. I could see that there would be more of that, in particular, let's say in the history category.
Right.
Like, are there tests? Like when you take one of these standardized tests that you're talking about, now they're at the end of every class now.
Yeah, but we went from having 4 exit level exams in the junior year to 11 end of course exams.
Okay. So is history administered, for example?
Yes. Okay,
so like are these multiple choice tests?
Multiple choice tests, griddable questions are. The questions are not exactly multiple choice questions in that they're not just rote memory, you know, dates, events, those kind of things. More of a practical application where you're looking at charts, graphs, political cartoons, and then they'll have a question off of political cartoons saying what is inferred by the sentence blah, blah, blah in this political cartoon. So one would have to have a working knowledge of the language, politics, subtle humor.
Who writes these tests?
Good point. Okay, so the way I see it now, I might not know everything about it, but again, back to the idea of the testing corporation. Okay, now this is my own theory. You've got a company that makes tests. So such and such number of kids are going to take that test the first time. The company makes money off every test administered, every test graded. Now, a certain percentage of those are going to fail that test and have to take it again. When they take it the second time, they're going to have to pay for the test. They're going to have to pay for the grading. If that corporation is a for-profit business, isn't it, beholden to them? Isn't it inherent that that they want a certain number of kids to fail, so they'll take it a second time, and then maybe even take it a
Well,
third
is it
time,
dictated that they want
time.
1% or half of 1% to fail this test, or is there a curve? How's this? It's just based upon arbitrary questions. What if half the kids fail the test? How are you going to know?
Right.
It's based on
And how do you know if it's a good test or not? So then there to your point of who writes the questions. Okay, educators for the most part are the group that write the test. Once a year they're summoned to Austin, and they spend a week, 8 or 10 hours a day, all day writing test questions, and these are you can apply for these jobs, and based on your experience, based on maybe some success and stuff you've had in your classroom, you're chosen. You go to Austin. They pay you a good bit of money. They put you up in a really nice hotel for the week, and you write test questions. Now, I don't know this for fact, but it seems to me that if you're a business and you're in business to make money, that if you have a person so if you go and you write 10 questions that are accepted and used on the test, those questions are tracked and followed. And a lot of tests have what are called field questions. Maybe this is the first year that question has been asked. The testing people are looking to see, the percentage that get it correct. In my mind, if you're trying to two things. Maybe you do have a noble cause and you're trying to raise rigor and relevance. So you're going to want to use people who write questions that have a lot of rigor and relevance. How do you determine rigor and relevance? Well, if a bunch of smart kids missed that question, it must have been pretty rigorous and pretty relevant. So they bring those same people back to write more questions, right? I mean, if you've got someone that writes really good questions that kids miss, so they have to take
it sounds
the test.
particularly strange what you're describing.
That's my point of view. That's the way I see it.
Well, let's say this.
Yeah.
I mean, would they ask? I mean, I just don't quite understand the process at all. Let's say, do they ask? And a lot of this is. Would they ask, what is the reason for the Vietnam War? Do they ask that on the standardized tests? Do they ask, how did we get in World War II? Because all this stuff has been rewritten through history. Well, it's because of the Gulf and Tonkin incident. Well, the Gulf and Tonkin incident was what they were commonly referred to as a false flag operation. Well, I mean, what?
You're not going to have questions that are that cut and dry. They're going to be more of a student might be presented with a quote from someone that was involved in that, and then the question might be, what could be inferred from General Westmoreland's statement? And then
then you're basically insinuating the way they're written now is they're giving you the answer. What could be inferred from Governor Westmoreland's statement? Then they're giving you the answer, and if you're smart enough, you could interpret what could be inferred.
Point. And
so you don't know any, there's no basis in knowledge. You don't have to know even who Governor Westmoreland is, the Vietnam War. What's inferred from his statement? That's more like an intelligence test, right? Is that right?
If you're a smart enough tester, you've nailed it. You're right there. Exactly. You can pass the test without having basic knowledge
right.
of the subject. And if you take that same theory and apply it to mathematics, we only have a certain number of days per year to spend with each kid, and the object of your entire year, your focus now, your entire year, is that not that the student learn operations, not that the student learns to be a well-rounded mathematics student. Their purpose when they come in each year is we're working towards you passing the test. You have to pass.
Well,
the
and
test.
that's another bigger question is why do they even need teachers now? Why isn't everything, if they have working towards these tests, why don't they just have everybody in a computer at home or in a big hall learning this stuff? What's the idea of having a teacher at all now? It gets too ridiculous.
Evolutionarily speaking, that may be, 20, 30 years down the road, teachers might become irrelevant. You're exactly right. I see that. You have to have a method of delivery.
Here, the kid raises his hand.
Just your
I mean, it was never set up very well, despite what they would say. Raise your hand if you have a question. It was never very well set up, because to raise your hand if you had a question, because the truth of the matter was the teacher was trying to teach to a book or something. So you'd raise your hand, you have a question. Well, then now there's no room for philosophical questions about the cause of World War II or whatever. There's no room for debate or for independent following your interest. Is that right?
On the 8th grade social studies test, there is a bank of questions that is probably about 300, maybe 250, 300 questions. That is the total bank of questions. After you as a school have taken a new test the first year, the second year the state releases those tests to you. As a teacher, when you're giving the standardized test at the end of the year, you're not supposed to look at the test. You're not supposed to look at the test. The student goes in with minimum, the preparation that the teacher was able to give. If that teacher doesn't have a released test to see what they're actually testing, they're basically picking and choosing from their teaks, and they're trying to guess at what's going to be on the test. After they get a released version, they know these questions were on the first one. A bunch of them will probably be on the next one. The next year, you've got another test. So now your bank of questions is getting closer to what they have. And so the more questions you have, the more of that bank of questions you have, the less you actually teach, because you're teaching to those questions.
Well, let me ask you this. If I went to a private school, and I was a senior right now in a private school, or a junior, do I have to pass the same test?
A lot of charter schools do not. It depending on how the funding is set up. If a private school is maybe a religious institution, no, they're not subject to the same.
Okay. Do you get a better education in a private institution than you do in a public? Would you say on that basis?
I don't know. The same question could be asked about a student who's homeschooled, where in a homeschool situation, everything is based on discovery. So what they have found in general is that kids that have been homeschooled, say up until 8th grade, and then they go to public school in 9th, a lot of them aren't prepared to be successful in the system that we have set up in the public school.
Well, are they successful to be in the system in college? I would venture to guess so they'd be more successful at the college level.
You'd think because especially with regard to a more rounded education, the more philosophical questions having been explored and things of that nature, basic operations in mathematics, 7th grade students, 8th grade students, when you start working with them on multiplication problems, they may know multiplication pretty well because they've absorbed it or whatever. They don't have times tables anymore. In elementary, they don't have times tables. You don't learn in 1st grade 2 times 2 equals 4.
And why is that?
There's kind of a move away from rote memory. Rote memory is like a very derogatory or very frowned upon phrase in education these days.
Well, I for whatever my opinion's worth, and it's worth no more than anybody else's, I would think that's a good thing.
Right,
because we used to memorize all this stuff Columbus discovered America in 1492, that you would never know the concepts.
Right.
All this rote memorization, the name of his 3 ships. How important are the names of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria versus the nature of why he came and or his true purpose, etc.
Right. Okay. So I would say that you're right, and that's the way that it's geared to go. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. Is moving away from the date isn't all that important. The year isn't all that important. If you kind of know what era something happened in, a lot of things in social studies now are covered in eras. This was the era of the cattle
Iron
boom,
Age.
the wall. Yes,
right.
exactly. Right.
Steel Age, Bronze Age. What age is this? Is this a computer age?
We're kind of post-technology now, I guess you would say.
Is that what they call it?
Information age. You'd hear that in the late 90s and early 2000s, especially with the internet boom.
This is an aside, but what I always find interesting is like it's you go to some countries, they're living like in the future. Maybe Japan and parts of the United States.
High-speed rail.
And then, but yet you could see Stone Age people in the world.
True.
It's amazing.
At this time.
At this time.
We are
from the Stone Age to the,
We have people who are living in basically.
I don't know what you would call Stone Age or prehistoric. I don't know. Wherein they don't.
Almost medieval.
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they have reason. There's a lot of tribes they don't have. They don't read. They don't write. Right.
But and that's an interesting thing, because if you think about civilizations, if you think about if America could be called a civilization, how old are we? 300, 400 years old, something like that. They have government buildings in Iceland that are the same buildings they used in the 10th century.
Yeah, and here if we have a building like 50 years old, it's old and they want to tear it down. In Corpus Christi, they tore down the Memorial Coliseum and Memorial Hospital because they're like 50 years of age.
And look at the courthouse, same thing.
So
that building would be.
What's that say about our respect for history here? I don't know.
True, and that would be.
I'm making an editorial comment. I'm teasing you a little bit,
Right. But I mean, the thing about it, and there's something to be said about a sense of permanency for a culture. I think to be able to in Ireland, where at a tavern 600 years ago, your 27 removed great grandfather built a chair and put it in that tavern. Certainly. And now you, as a descendant, are able to sit in that chair because he built that chair for you 800 years ago.
This is true. That's great.
Yeah.
But it's also true your descendants could hold you back.
True.
They got their tricks, right?
Well, that's exactly right.
You know what I'm saying?
6 of one, half dozen, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Understood.
Anyway, we were talking about education, and then what do you think of Obama's? And again, this is Mr. Rob Stoner, and we didn't put you as an educator, which we probably should have at the beginning of the show. Partly because we thought we might get into the Fiesta de los Muertos and your involvement in the art walk. We didn't know which direction the show was going to go. But you are a teacher at West Oso Junior High, correct? And obviously, recently, Obama came up with an idea that the first 2 years of President Obama, because unlike some people, I don't believe in disrespect for a duly elected president, even if I disagree with him.
True.
President Obama was for this 2 years of community college, not a voucher for any program, for any college or university, community college. What do you think of the 2 years free at a community college? You think that's a good idea?
I was listening to an explanation on a news program a few days ago after he had made that pitch, and the way that I heard
pitch. He's a salesman.
Is that right? I think every politician's a salesman. Okay. Some of them are selling snake oil.
I would say that the modern branch of politician looks more like a salesman than they did years ago. Maybe they're younger, Clinton and President Obama and Bush, they look more like salesmen than they did years ago. They had more of a statement-like quality when they were older, I thought. Is that right?
To go to the question of nobility of cause,
maybe so.
Nobility of purpose.
Maybe they were just better. Maybe they were better salesmen. So
maybe so. And I think then too that there was a necessity to there was a sense of purpose. There was a sense that they were moving towards something grand. I don't know if we still have that purpose or not. I think that with the two-party system has kind of become, as long as I look good today, who wins the day? And it's not really so much about who advances our cause, who makes us a better civilization. It's just who wins or loses, to some extent. I mean, I think.
Well, no. I think it's become like almost like a high school football game, a competitive sport.
Right.
It's I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We won these elections, we won that one. I mean, it's gotten that base.
It is, and that happens not only on a daily basis now, but probably with the 24-hour news cycle on an hourly basis. Who won the last hour? And the thing about it is, you take that back to some old school thinking. There was a high school football coach out in West Texas that said, he said, every Friday night, half those teams lose.
That's right.
Same is going to be true when you pit people against each other politically. Half of them are going to lose every time. There doesn't seem to be any gray area. There doesn't seem to be any sense of compromise. It's winner take all is what I see.
Well, and it's gotten. Well, let's talk before I digress. Let's talk about the Obama Free Community College program. You mentioned it as a pitch,
right?
Okay, so what do you think of not the pitch, but the possibility of having a free community college for 2 years?
Well, I was hearing this spoken of, and they were talking about how in the beginning of the idea of free public education, that at first they guaranteed a fifth grade education. 200 years ago.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And then that progressed to an 8th grade education, and then that progressed to a 12th grade. My grandmother was finished with school in 8th grade. That's what her family standard was. She got finished with 8th grade. She went to work on the farm,
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather came from just a little bit different socioeconomic group. They were only a few miles apart, probably very little difference in the way they lived, but the standard in his family was high school education. So my grandmother received an 8th grade. My grandfather went all the way through 12. Now, the way I heard this was, shouldn't this be then just a natural extension of what we do, what we provide for our young people, elementary, junior high, high school, now a little bit of college. In some of the countries that progressives like to look at, your Denmarks and Switzerlands and things of that nature, where a bachelor's degree is the standard, and every student receives a free education up until their bachelor's degree. So if you're looking at something like that and you want to maybe incorporate that idea, okay, so then that's where we're headed. Wouldn't it be nice if we could afford to give every student an education all the way up to their bachelor's degree? And that's kind of the way I hear it. Being what it's leading to. Now, I think what he's asking for is some work in return. That you're going to donate some time and do community service type projects, or work in schools or whatever it might be to earn that.
The main criticism that I know about it, and I'm not well read on the subject, a friend of mine taught at community colleges for some period of years, and he said that the community colleges are like set up across the United States. They were set up like almost uniformly. And he says that most of them don't provide an education. In many respects, they're a scam. Many people go there who aren't qualified to go. Many people who go there will never pass, can't pass. And I could state that anecdotally, based on my personal experience, I have seen locally wherein they tell certain people without the qualifications that you're going to get this degree and you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and they know full well that these people don't have the qualifications that they're ever going to be able to do it, and that's a complicated issue. Yes. And yet they take them in as students, and tragically kind of fool them and lead them on, single mothers or whatever come to mind, that you're going to be doing this and you're going to be a hero in this glamorous occupation, and then they never do it. And they can't do it. Maybe they go into debt to do it, and there's human tragedy going on. There's disappointment. There's debt. I'm not. My opinion that Mr. President Obama, in fact, there's something about why community college. Where did that come? Why not? Why not, like I said, a voucher for a where they come up? I think there's some sort of a. I'm a kind of a conspiratorialist, unfortunately, or fortunately. I'm just wondering. I'm very suspect.
Right. Well, a point that I was getting to a while ago is that teachers being idealistic, politicians possibly being idealistic. We don't know what exactly.
We're going to talk about teachers being idealistic here in 1 second.
Yeah, but the thing is, we were taught by our professors as we were going out into the educational world that our goal should be that all students receive a bachelor's degree minimum. That would be what is required in the year 2020 or whatever. That every student, every youngster, every person growing up in this country should have a bachelor's degree. We bought into that. And at the same time, H. Ross Perot and the things we started talking about earlier give everybody the exact same education. Everybody's got to go to college. Everybody has to have a bachelor's degree. And then exactly what you said is true. When we started setting those standards at the high school level, where we're judging a student on not on anything else. This kid might be the next, Rembrandt, Picasso, whatever.
That's right. Maybe has a musical talent, artistic talent, philosophical
trades.
Right.
These people that lay tile, people that do plumbing. When you call a plumber out to your house, you hate doing it because you know it's going to cost you $100 an hour. When you take your car to a mechanic, that's $90 an hour. When you take your computer to get it repaired, bench fee is $90 just to put it on the bench. Those people make good money. They make a good living. They contribute to our society. They're very productive, very successful. We haven't done a thing to train them. We're not doing a thing. If we try to pigeonhole every one of them into, you're going to get a bachelor's degree in this and you're going to have English and da-da-da-da, those things aren't for everybody. So we were starting off doing people a disservice. Maybe by the time they're in junior high, if a person has an interest in painting cars, let's say. We know now from some of the TV shows and stuff that we see that, you can take a $4,000 car and sell it for $75,000 if you have the talent to transform that into a piece of art. We don't teach that in public school.
I could tell you a story about a relative of mine who I would say is one of the most successful of all my relatives and my cousins, who can't read and is insulin dependent diabetic, who followed his father's trade in painting cars and is one of the most successful of us all. Right. Including, maybe personally and or financially. Very successful, and he has a garden and this, etc. And it has to do, I guess, with willpower, honesty and integrity, and his liking his trade. So it just falls into precisely what you were stating.
So we would tie that into, but now what you're seeing is, so we've had 30, I'm right at 30 years of trying to do what H. Ross Perot wanted us to do. Now there have been some schools that were very resilient in, especially in rural areas. Just here locally, Chiloso Midway, Cal Island, come to mind. The old FFA programs, Future Farmers of America. Many high schools across Texas that had huge agricultural properties where they were actually farming, where they were raising the vegetables that they were serving in the cafeteria, where they're raising animals and put them into livestock shows and all those kind of things. Although a lot of the funding for that was pulled away as a result of those two legislative actions we talked about, a lot of those communities have stuck to their guns, and the parents, the people of that community, have continued to fund those projects so that they continue. So you had that, still there. Now you're starting to see the thing come all the way back around to where South Texas trade schools, Del Mar College, and trade schools, I think is kind of what we need to focus on there. Is okay, now we're coming back around and saying, okay, you go to school your freshman and sophomore year, your junior year, if you want to be a welder, you go to school in the morning, in the afternoon you go to Del Mar and you learn welding. So they're able to get their education, graduate high school, but at the same time, the day they graduate high school, a lot of kids are walking out with their welding certification, with their auto mechanic certification.
Well,
so
all
we've
that's
gone straight back to vocational education again.
But I'm going to say this. I've never heard anybody say this. I've talked to a friend of mine about it, has kind of a couple of blue collar shops, and I said, well, the reason these trades are paying so much money now, more than they used to, is because since they introduced women into the workforce, they doubled the workforce for lawyers, doctors, teachers, whatever, right? Everything. But they did a lot of those trades, welding, etc., and those heavier trades, women either don't want to do them, or physically are incapable, or having a harder time to do them. And obviously, people, I think there's some degree of political correctness when they talk about women's physical capabilities, bone density, etc. I think it's questionable. I've seen women in my Social Security disability practice very much harm from hard physical labor. But so I'm thinking that's where in a lot of these trades are doing better. Only half the population is maybe not total half. I mean, there's exceptions to the rule, but that's why they're doing better. Is that right?
Well, I think
How many women mechanics do you see? How many women welders? Could you imagine doing a welding job all day?
True, but if you look at it from a generational standpoint, when I was 5 years old, my grandfather took me to the savings and loan and put $50 in a savings account, and he said, "I've worked with my hands my entire life. I started working, in the oil field in 1929. I don't want you to ever have to do that. I want you to have a job where you work in the air conditioning. I want you. But
listen. That was naive too, wasn't it? Isn't that a little bit naive too? In other words, that's an idea. Come on, what difference does it make if I'm working? I don't know about teaching as an attorney. It's hard labor. Maybe it's not physical labor; it's mental labor. And in some respects, I mean, you could argue. What about all these studies about how bad sitting is for you? Right now, I mean, this idea that you're going to work with your mind. It's so prestigious or whatever. Yeah, it's prestigious until you're so burnt out you can hardly think. I mean, true. In other words, you see what I'm indicating?
Point made, but I think that the idea of an easier life, and the concept that every generation should have it better than the generation before, that's only determined within, your family. What's the standard? For my grandfather, the standard was he didn't want his children or his grandchildren to have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He didn't want them to have to work Saturday and Sunday. He wanted them to be able to spend more time with their families.
I think that's great if it worked out that way. I don't know that it really has, especially for the degree of a lot of times personal deprivation that people go through to become lawyers and or doctors, depriving themselves of a personal life oftentimes, having children until they're older. There's a big trade-off there.
Right.
So, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, point well made, and that's kind of a little bit different thing, because you're right. I mean, that's another category altogether.
And you know what else? I'm going to interrupt you. Sure. I remember saying this to a friend of mine. I remember in the 70s what everybody said in college. I like people. I want to work with people. Did they say that down here? We said
yes,
that.
Yes. We still say that.
Now I think that's so funny.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Well,
people drive you crazy.
I'm even more simplistic than that. I took a degree in finance,
Yes.
And my idea that I was going to be a stockbroker. I was going to go to New York and work on Wall Street and make millions and millions of dollars.
Maybe you could have done that. People do that.
As I got out of school, as I finished my degree and I learned more about what my craft was going to be, what I was going to do, I came to the conclusion that in this life, you can either work with people or you can work with their money. And they're a hell of a lot harder to work with when you're working with their money. So the idea of working with people where money's not involved, for me, was an attractive idea. I mean, coming from a financial background, and then why did I wind up in teaching? Why did I move from that into teaching? Was it because I chose an easier route? No. I mean, it's like you say, we're working lots of hours. We're under a lot of stress. There's a lot of things going on. But at the same time...
Are you? Are you working a lot of hours?
Yeah.
How many hours does a teacher work?
For a junior high math teacher, they're probably working a minimum 70, 75, maybe 80 hours a week.
So they work Saturday and Sunday. If I went to the school, I'd see these teachers like I'm here at this office?
We started Saturday school today. We have Saturday school lined up from now until testing.
The other thing is you're talking...
From now until
okay,
testing.
I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to disagree, but I have some experience. Like I said, I did in-school suspension. I substituted, and then I guess that's my experience, right? This was years ago. But you talk about teacher idealism, right?
Right.
How idealistic is it if you're a union member?
True.
I mean, you go in there, not because you're idealistic. I think it's a guarantee. It's a job that you can get in a community like Sinton, wherein it's difficult to have a degree and get a job.
Right.
Or in Alice, it's difficult to have a degree and get a job. And any city, even the size of Corpus, it's probably difficult to have a degree and get a job unless it's a postgraduate degree. But if you're a school teacher, you can utilize that degree.
Yeah, and it's fairly
and you could have the prestige of being a school teacher.
Yeah, and it's a fairly safe thing. To your point, yeah, it's a fairly safe thing. I mean,
you can't be fired unless you can't be fired, can you?
You're going to have to mess up pretty bad.
Right, because you're unionized. You got civil servant. You got civil service guarantees too.
Of course, unions don't have much pull in Texas to begin with.
They don't.
Not as far as I can
But they
see.
are unionized.
Well, as a teacher, we're really not unionized. We belong to professional associations, but then there are some. Believe like the AFT, American Federation of Teachers. That is a national organization. That's a union. But these other professional organizations, they do a little bit of lobbying on our behalf.
Do you think the often Republican argument that problems with education is caused by school teachers union, is that a valid argument or an invalid argument?
I think in the United States in general, you would probably see it because you hear anecdotal things. In New York, you've got teachers that they have tenure and things. No, we don't have that. We don't have tenure. We're on a contract.
So it depends, of course, the state, et cetera, that you're on.
Yeah, we're on a 1-year contract, and our contract has to be renewed each year.
I wanted to thank you for coming on, Mr. Robert Stoner. He is an educator and he's a teacher at the junior high at West Oso. And we were going to talk about Fiesta de los Muertos, et cetera, which you're involved in heavily.
Yes,
but maybe, God willing, you'll be able to come on and we could talk about that at length on another show.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Good night.